welcome to this show. And today we want to talk about something that is very critical for us as women, but also as citizens. Because before anything, we need to actually realize what our conflict and peace narratives are as we go on living, as we make decisions in governance. So today I have a panel constituted to talk about women, peace and security, what it means for us, what roles do women play in peace processes, and what we can do differently going forward to ensure that there is peace, but then also that there is, the women's voice and agency when it comes to security questions. And on the panel today to discuss this are people that are not new to me, but most probably new to you. But they are women that are in policy, women that are in legal entities, and have a grounding in where we are going in this conversation. Right next to me is Naima Isa. I'm very glad to have you today.
I'm honored to be back.
Naima is from FIDA, right?
Yes, FIDA.
And they're doing the work for the women there. And next to her, I have a brilliant policymaker in ECD, but then also one who is grounded in the peace and security issues, is Roline Tusiime from the Great Lakes Institute for Strategic Studies. Welcome to this panel, Roline.
Thank you so much.
And seated next to her is Hilda Nsimiire, who also equally works with me at the Great Lakes Institute for Strategic Studies. And so these are some of the conversations we have on a daily, necessarily not grounded particularly in women, but in the wholesomeness of what security and peace means to us. But to begin us off, I want to indulge Naima in what I was thinking about it as I was coming here, that security is one of the hard questions to have, because when we speak security, people think about arms, guns, and men going to war.
Yeah.
But the female picture of security is usually missed. And so I wanted us to have at least a semblance of a picture of what it means when we speak about women, peace, and security.
Okay. Thank you very much for the question. So usually, when we talk about security or insecurity, the first thing that comes in mind is the men picking up guns and going to war and fighting and all that. And then we tend to forget the people that wars affect most, and those are the women and children. And I'll put a reference in regards to the number of refugees that we have now, which is close to 2 million, I think. And if you see, the majority of the refugees we have in the country who are being affected by war are women and children, making roughly 80% of the refugees we have. So the drastic effect that wars or security and peace has on a woman and a child is far-reaching, and it's so much that we cannot even fathom. So when it comes to security, peace, usually some of us have never even witnessed what insecurity is. So they're from stories we've had. You know, in 1979, there was this war, I think that was the last war we had that went on until the 1986. And so to some of us who are young, these are stories we hear, histories, but our parents, our grandparents, I can tell from my mom's time when she was talking about war, she's like, people should never wish for war because you don't know what we went through. And coming from a woman's perspective, she was with a child at that time, and what she was going through, hiding in forests, going in ditches, so that you're not killed along the way. So the effect it had on her, the stories she told me until how she survived and managed to go and live as a refugee in Nairobi, Kenya, that is really appalling. Like, the stories you would not want to witness as a person. And yes, the majority of our parents went through this, and those that were born in 79, others witnessed it with their children. And so in my mind, I was like, so where was my father in this time? My father probably had already escaped, So the effect it has on women, especially women who do not get the opportunity to elope or to run away for rescue with their men, is far-reaching and drastic. And it affects them psychologically, physically, all through the life. So yeah, for women it is more, the effect is more drastic than the men, because for the man it's like, I defend myself and that's it, let me go,
or I join the fighting groups.
But for the women, it's the effects, looking for food for these children, looking for food for yourself, the children you're having or the child you have, trying to make sure that they are, in a peaceful place, sleeping, and the emotional effect it has on the children also rubs off on you as a woman. Yeah, so.
And I love that you say that, because earlier on I was listening to some of the testimonies of the Congolese women in this conflict that has gone on for over 25 years. And as they walk into the Ituri region, the lady said for as long as she kept going further and further into the border area, she was always raped. And it wasn't specific that it was the rebels or it was just security officials, both the army that should be protecting her and also the rebels. And so she was only happy that she was alive. But she had lost herself in the process. And so when she reaches the Ituri border, the first point of reference was that she needed to be, brought out, even before she would think of her safety, brought into a space where they can take care of her, give her medicine for, those sexually related diseases that she could have gotten from the rebels. But I said that to bring you in the conversation, Roline, on the role of, women in building voice and agency around peace processes. What then should be the role of women when it comes to peace processes?
Thank you so much, Gloria. So women here, when they are faced with issues, that comes along with their children, and they take that burden, not like the men. So women need to get in the design of the process of peace processes first. They should be considered in the first place when they are designing those peace processes, so that they take part, they know how it is done. If it comes, I should do this. And then those processes, they should also participate when the time comes. They should participate, be at the forefront, make sure that all women are informed, they are trained, they have the skills to make sure they go through those insecurities.
I was listening to someone say, is it possible that where we do not give the women guns, is it possible to give them self-defense, tactics? And I was like, are you kidding me? How are you going to train these women in the moment of conflict? Because they've not been prepared.
For the conflict.
They've not been prepared for the conflict, and they're thrust into this. So how do we, build them up to be able to not only have voice, but, create community for them to be able to say, I can be equally, I can find solutions from this community as the conflict is going by? That's a critical question, because in there, usually there's a lot of despair. There's a lot of mental health issues. So how do we, deal with those issues to empower these women that are caught in conflict?
Okay. When women are already caught in conflicts, yes, there should be pre-training. Let them get those skills. Let them be trained. Even in Rwanda, they are doing such kind of trainings. Yes, let them be ready, energetic, so that they can respond when such time comes. And those skills also should be imparted to other women at the local level. Every woman should be knowing that when this time comes, the war time comes, I should do this trick, I should
play dead.
Yes, be ready.
Well, I think in addition also, I'd like to say we need to acknowledge the fact that women, when conflicts happen, they face violence from when conflict happens during their fleet and even where they're settled.
Exactly.
That's one thing we need to acknowledge. So talking with a few refugees some time back when I was working in the refugee camp, you tend, like, the trauma is built up from women's bodies used as a weapon against them. So they are raped, defiled, just to prove power over them or power over the men, to show that, we can use their bodies to kind of diminish you as a man or diminish the community, because a woman's body is considered a temple and a fountain of honor for the community. So that alone, it's a patriarchal belief, which I know.
And it
but
makes
that's
access to power very important for
very
women.
important for women, because for women, her body is her power. So once you abuse her body, you have diminished her power. And so when we acknowledge that, then we need to be very intentional on the inclusion of women in policy making, in decision making regarding their peace and security. With the exclusion of women, we cannot achieve that.
I was reading somewhere and they're saying, and we need to have women not just as mediators, but as fast responders to the issues that are dealt them during, peace and insecurity times. But then also, I love what you say when it comes to access to power. A lot of people imagine that, if I've given you an office and I've put you somewhere, maybe you're in legislation, I have empowered you enough to be able to have voice. But like we were saying earlier on, it's more of tokenism. And so even in these refugee areas, a gentleman said, in the places where we're organizing these women in the internally displaced camps, we decided that we would have a woman leader and try also a camp for male-led camps. And you would be surprised that the women-led camps actually thrived because the women answered the issues that were important for them in that time. And thriving becomes easy when women are at the table to define what works for them. And I love that you say that. But I want to bring Hilda in on what she said when it comes to violence and using women's bodies as a weapon. Earlier on in the week, I asked someone, why is it that in war times, there's a lot of rape and sexual-based violence that happens to women? And rightly so, maybe men do suffer, but the most pronounced is that there is a lot of sexual violence that happens to women. And I ask that to bring your head to what can we do differently when it comes to addressing war other than picking up guns? Because that's a solution that has always been given. What can we do different?
Thank you, moderator. I think responding to the effects of the conflicts, we should always empower those affected women so that they can cope up with the situation, since most of them can be traumatized, others since they can be sexually harassed, they are being raped. So it's very important for them to be empowered so that they can acquire the skills to respond to the effects of the conflicts. Then another thing, I think these affected women, they should also be around it. We should always carry out advocacy, because most of these women, they are speechless, they are voiceless, they have nowhere to run to in case they are affected. So it's better for us to advocate for their rights so that they can easily access the services. As we know that during the conflicts, most of them run away from their designated areas. They go to other areas, of which when they reach there, the natives always mistreat them because those are their places. So advocacy would work out for them. Then another thing, these women, they should always form the movement groups.
Women movements.
Yes, women movement groups, so that they can always do
the same voice.
They can always have the same voice. For example, like in such conflicts, most of women, they are always advised maybe to involve in some services like knitting baskets, but that would not be actually enough, because most of them, they can be mentally affected, they can be physically affected. So really forming those movements would help them catch up.
And I love that you speak about women's movements, because radically so, the women's movement and the feminist movement have been at the forefront of making sure that we deal with issues of sex and violence against women. But I think now going forward, in as much as we've had sexual-based violence movements, pride rights, I think it's going to become very important for us to also have a movement around conflict and violence, so that we address it in the now, because it is, as much as it shouldn't be a women issue, it is something that we need to deal with for the safety of women.
True.
And maybe Naima then to ask you then, militarization has been always a solution to a lot of conflict within the Great Lakes region.
Definitely.
When we speak about the Congo, it was that we had now Operation Shuja happen. When we speak about, I love that the women in Sudan led the revolution.
Sure.
That was a high moment. Yes. But the challenge that we have is we've not, used the non-violent ways of addressing conflict.
Yeah.
And I would want to understand whether there are ways in which conflict can be dealt with before it escalates into, outright violence against women.
Okay, like I say in my terms, if women were leaders, if we had the power men had, we wouldn't be having wars in this world. We'll just be having countries that don't speak to each other. Like, I don't talk to Uganda because, and that would be much.
Uganda made me mad.
Yeah, it would be so much, like, I think, more peaceful than men. But men leading, sometimes it's the ego that comes and fights. And for men, I am not generalizing, but that is what the trend we've seen and patriarchy. Yes. So the ego comes in, and then you want to prove you're more powerful than the other, and I think that's why the wars are here. And Russia and Ukraine speaks to that. Someone wanting to prove power over the other. Yeah. So the non-conflict ways of resolving would be specific. So I'd like to draw attention to the UN Security Resolution 1325, which is a formal and legal document that has come to speak to the inclusion of women, in conflicts, during resolution, repatriation, and resettlement. And we'd like to acknowledge that there's some things that have been highlighted, which is a landmark to women. For over the years, during World War I, World War II, and the wars we've come to see before the adoption of this resolution, we've been seeing it's either we do a ceasefire or not. Let's talk about these peace talks. I remember the Kony Museveni wars, the peace talks that dragged on. In the meantime, women were being affected and are not being included in these processes. So this resolution has since become an organizing framework for women, to which we acknowledge this. And I think that 12 Great Lakes countries have they have signed the resolution and applying bits and pieces of the resolution in the action plans, which is a nice step in the beginning, but we need it to be adopted in whole, in its entirety, for a woman to be fully protected in such circumstances. So what the resolution says is it reaffirms the importance of the important role women play in conflict prevention, conflict resolution, and peace building. So women are mothers, we are nurturers and all that. So if you can talk to a man, when this is your husband, you can talk to him and they have a conflict with that brother, and the peace will be created. So I think this is the backbone of the resolution, is when a woman is involved in peace resolution, you might come to the resolution faster than leaving two egos and hormones fighting. When a woman comes in, there's peace, and people might resolve to, let's respect this father, let's respect this woman, and listen to what she says. So inclusion of women in such decisions, in such scenarios and arenas is really, really important. And also the resolution emphasizes the importance of women's equal involvement in peace and security, and the need for women's increased participation in conflict prevention and peace building. So when women are left out, there's no resolution, because first of all, the conflicts affect the women most. So why not offer, a chair on the table for the woman who's most affected, for us to understand. For the man, it might be about ego. Like I told you the story. My father had already,
disappeared already.
So it is the woman who is staying behind to make sure that, the kids, where are they? Let me put them in a safety. So if this woman is brought in and her participation is considered, if people can hear the effects that these women face, the violence they face, maybe remorse might come in, and the men will be like, you know what, let's ceasefire, let's not fight, let's be peaceful for the sake of our mothers, our daughters, or our wives. So it is important. It also reaffirms the importance of international humanitarian and human rights law in the protection of women and their rights. The IHL talks about protection of women since they are most affected. So this resolution reaffirms their importance. It comes to say, you know what, in everything we decide, a woman must be put at the forefront.
Yeah.
So that is a way of including women,
Yeah.
and also recognizing the need to adopt a gender perspective in peacekeeping.
Yeah.
Most peacekeeping has not been having like gender perspectives. Like I say,
Others.
World War, let's cease fire, let's not cease fire. What do you have to give
Yes.
up for us to, you know, to be calm? So a gender perspective recognizes the fact that women are affected in a special way, and women resolutions, we must tailor specific resolutions.
Yeah.
And implementation for women. If you're to give psychosocial support, you know, they're faced through a lot: the rape, the defilement, the abuses, the psychological torture, physical torture. A mother can withstand anything for the sake of her children.
Yeah.
So all these have to be considered in when peace building or repatriation is happening. And it is important because women are important. If you exclude them, then you're not doing anything.
Excuse me, actually, only 4.7 women form military groups. So they are really few in the military.
And even if, there are few, but you know, the military, there's like, man up, we are men. And they forget there are women included. And the needs of women are special from those of men. From all the things that they need during the war, at combat, even when they're being resettled as ex-combat, they have special needs. The PTSD affects them differently from the men.
True.
Yeah.
And I love that you bring in that, because, you know, while we speak peace, it's easy to look at peace as adding women to the military, because that is what we've done.
Tokenism still.
Yes. We get the women, we add them to the police system. We get the women, we add them to the parliamentary system. We get the women, we add them to the military system. And so in a sense, we feel like we've dealt with the affirmative action issues, the gender issues, but we've not understood the need for participation that is meaningful.
Yeah.
And so in that regard, Roline, how do we, you know, make the role of women critical, especially in decision making? You know, how do we have them not just as tokens, not just as, you know, symbols, but have meaningful participation, especially in policy formulation, in creating a diverse look of what peace does look for women?
Okay, thank you, Gloria. First of all, we need to make women matter. We need to emphasize that women should matter in everything. So we should let women access justice.
Yeah.
Yes, let them access justice. That creates confidence in them that if you do miss something like bad, I have somewhere to report to, I'm listened to, I'm taken care of. That only creates confidence, and it will let them speak out openly. Another thing is let them have access to health, good health.
Yeah.
Because health is, when you have good life, good health, you can do other things well.
And I think not even just health in the bracket, but health defined for women.
Yes.
Because it could be that we want to have, you know, access to sexual reproductive health
and rights.
Health and rights. We need to be able to access maternal care inside our internally displaced camps, but even within the raging war. So health in its diversity, in tallying with women. Mental health.
Mental health, antenatal care, during pregnancy, they are taken care of, even after birth, postnatal, even their children, because when a mother is good, is okay with their children, when their children are good in terms of health, there is that happiness on a woman, on a mother. So that should be taken care of. Also, the safety nets should be improved, and also empowered, educated. Their livelihoods should be improved. They have money, they can take care of their own basic needs.
Okay, Hilda, in silencing the guns, that was our resolution for 2020, that Africa should be able to silence the guns. Post 2020, we are still fighting. There is war in the Congo, there is war in South Sudan, there is war in Sudan, There's one in the Ethiopia region,
Somalia.
in the Somali region, in the Burundi region as well, because, you know, Tabo Tobaro, the armed rebels are in Congo preparing to attack into Burundi. But then also there are silent wars and conflicts. You have Uganda not talking to Rwanda, Rwanda not talking to Burundi, Congo threatening to shell Rwanda. And in all this, the women's voice at the negotiating table is not felt. Recently, the heads of state were seated for the Nairobi peace talks. And there was only one woman at that table, President Sokolo. And so it's very hard to think of resolutions, peace deals and peace agreements that are going to come out of these rooms filled with a lot of masculine energy, with women at the forefront of the conflict, because women are the ones feeling the brunt of the conflicts. I give that that analysis to help us, you know, see how we bring women to the negotiating table, especially because statistics has shown that 50% of the peace agreements that have been made have failed without the women's voice in. How do we have the women be brought to the negotiating tables of these peace agreements, of these peace accords?
Thank you once again, moderator. Actually, when you talked of silencing the guns, you reminded me of some trending news that those security men were talking about. Because if we talk about silencing the guns, but those security men, they were like shooting to death. So I wonder the situation of security we are living in really. Because they were like, maybe if, let me say, you're caught as a thief, no mercy on you. They just have to kill you alive. Yeah.
Let me bring Naima in this conversation, because I was thinking aloud in my head when I remembered the fact when she spoke about security agencies, and I remembered how the LDC, the are they called LDC? The local defense forces.
LDU, I
think.
LDU.
Yes. LDU. When the LDU, you know, beat women, especially pregnant women, sick women, in a time of crisis. I mean, we're going through a pandemic, and then there were women that needed to access health care that ended up being, you know, tortured and killed at the hands of security forces that should have been protecting them. And I ask that we have women at the negotiating table simply because it's important to understand how conflict affects women. And equally also to find, you know, ordinary solutions to seemingly things that men have made to look hard to deal with. If we are fighting, what are we fighting for? If this is the reason we are fighting, how do we address this reason? How do we protect the women in these communities as violence is happening? But equally, how do we have the women's voice at the table? And so when she said the security forces, I remembered how in COVID, they weren't even given voice. You didn't have to explain where you were going. You were beaten simply because you were moving.
There's an order,
So our voices, how do we then make them matter?
Well, what happened during COVID was a disaster. I think the first lockdown, it was not gendered at all. The decisions that were made, the protocols that were passed were not gendered at all. And we kind of sort of see this being remedied at the second lockdown. I'm going to start continuing from where she stopped. Yeah, so when we have Rwanda not talking to Kenya, that's a good reference. So to Uganda, or Uganda not talking to Rwanda. I know that affected women drastically because if we look at our economy is dominated with farming, and women are the people tilling land and are producing these foods. So when Rwanda blocks exportation of crops, of food, and the trade between Uganda, it's women going to suffer. The income, the economy is going to be affected. During COVID, where women were not supposed to travel, whether you're in labor at that moment, the security forces did not care. That affected women in a way that you cannot tell when you're going to have a child. It happens at any.
So you don't have a letter and then they tell you.
Some would fake pregnancies
the faking pregnancies was the drastic measure we had to take in order for women to be heard. But so this affected me. So in every decision you make, once you don't have a woman on the table to decide and bring in the gender perspective, that you know what, yes, there's lockdown, but let's consider women who are in labor, who are almost due. Let's consider women who might have attacks in the night and they need, let me say, maternity care. If a woman is not on the table, a man will not have that at the back of the mind. And that we saw during COVID, when the protocols were passed, the SOPs, and no woman was on the table. That reflected from the decisions and the beating that women faced. So I really emphasize it is really key and important for women to be on the table for these decisions, for the peace building, the peace agreements and the decisions heads of state make. The gender perspective has to be considered, because at the end of it all, it is the woman who's going to be affected, and not the man might not care about certain issues, but you as a woman, it is important because this affects you differently from the men.
And always. So we're going to take a short break and then be back. But as we go, I want as the audience to think about the time you saw your mother struggle or, you know, try to make ends meet. And the reality was there was no one going to speak for them on what they critically needed to address the issues they dealt with simply to survive. So when we come back, we're going to look for a way forward on how we deal with the issues that are not spoken on the table, but need to be part of the agenda for women. Let's come back. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. So we want to wind this conversation, but before we do that, have you subscribed to the Civic Space channel so that you find these conversations and interrogate them even in your communities where you are, but then also continue the conversation online. So today, as we talk about women and peace and security, we want to wind down this conversation in regards to where then do we go when we speak about security and women. What can be done differently, and who is responsible, like who is critically responsible for the issues that we've spoken here, and what can they do different? How do we deal with power? How do we do with the political economy of peace and war and conflict, us as women? And so I want to bring in Naima there, the role of the women's movement. How do we leverage and tap into, you know, the power of us as women in dealing with conflict?
Okay, thank you very much for that question. There's one thing I'd like to acknowledge is the women's movement in Uganda. We have done amazing things. We have a push to see policies be gendered. And this is all thanks to the women's movement. And I also believe that if we set our mind and our agenda straight on peace and security, maybe it is being done, but we need to be more intentional about, you know, peace and security for women. Then maybe the National Action Plan on Peace and Security will be more vibrant. Like we have seen so many policies and laws. A very good example is the Succession Act that has been passed. We have had so many provisions of the Divorce Act being struck out for being, you know, segregative and unconstitutional in nature. So I'm a feminist. I identify as a feminist. And to me, a feminist approach to peace is to premise it on the universal integration of a gender perspective in all spheres. We have to acknowledge that peace to us as women, or generally, is the absence of every type of structural violence, peace and security for all, and a peace premised on the universal integration of a gender perspective. As feminists and women's movement, we don't have to stop at just the everyday violence that we go through. We need to also be very intentional and focus on peace, security, integration, resettlement, and what gender perspective or gender aspects there it needs to be paid attention to. So as a women's movement, like I had said earlier, women face violence from the inception of the wars or the insecurity during fleet, during resettlement, even when they are being hosted as refugees. So then as women in Uganda, the refugee women in Uganda, how do we then bring them on board to ensure that their rights are protected as women, not as refugees, but as women? How then do we go out of the way and reach out and try to ponder and ask questions of what are the issues that refugees need to be addressed. The fact that they're women in our country, as a women's movement, we need to be supportive, we need to be inquisitive, we need to stand up and say, once you're a woman in Uganda, the women's movement has got your back. That is all we need to do. So I know I've interacted with several refugees, and maybe the people doing organizing, advocacy, and speaking for refugee women. But I don't think refugee women need that we have this strong movement of women that if they are part of, they don't have to worry about all the atrocities that they might face and the violence they might face even when they're settled from the communities, they're settled, the host communities. So the women's movement need to be intentional. We need to refocus an agenda to include the rights and protection of refugees during peace and their resettlement.
And I love that you say that, because it's very critical for us to imagine that while we, organize and plan for women, a lot of times we other the refugees, we other asylum seekers. I've never actually thought of lensing it that, is it possible that the women's movement does include refugees? Does include their agencies, not necessarily just to be their voice, but that to add them to be part of the voice in the women's movement. And that is where I want to bring you in, Lorine, in the othering. You have, even in national plans, I know the refugees are here for a while, but most of them go 22 plus years living in a particular country. But apart from, peacekeeping units coming in to deal, how do we have this check of diversity in adding asylum seekers, in adding immigrant women to the conversation? How do we have leadership roles for them wherever they are, wherever they're situated, without othering them, without having them as a last alternative? How do we plan better for them?
Okay, thank you so much, Gloria. I think on that part, we should host countries should build decent places, decent houses that improve those people's dignity.
Get them out of the tents.
Yes.
I think the tents look like it's temporary. You're here just for months,
20 years,
then you'll be gone. Yet it's 20 years later, I'm still in a tent.
They need decent
housings.
They need to be loved. Show them love. Actually, just need them to form groups, music, dance, and drama.
Yes.
Let them engage in those groups. That will improve their mental health.
Yeah.
Form groups, get counselors in those groups that will talk to them, encourage them to have peace. To have that sense of belonging, I'm loved, I'm secure. Improve their safety nets, let them get good security, good health system. If I get sick, I have a healthy center.
Healthcare where we can go.
Yes.
With medicine.
With medicine, actually with insurance. And let them get insurance. Okay. When I have insurance, I'll be able to go to the health center at any time with my children. So if they are good at housing, they can be okay at that.
And I love that you talk about dance, music, and drama.
Yeah, there is a way it
even
makes
sports.
It's a healing process.
It's a healing process.
Yeah.
And I've been on a healing journey myself, and I've realized how much wellness is part of my feminism and my women's advocacy, that I cannot separate how well I am from the work that we do. But I love that you speak of dance and drama, because trauma teaches you to be in survival mode. And I know for a fact a lot of them, release tension when they play out, a different scenario.
When you laugh, there is
even
that.
Sports.
That
I think I know
release.
of refugee sports teams that use sports as a peace and conflict strategy, a peace building strategy.
Yes.
So it's important to bring the arts on board.
Yes, even in a company or in a workplace, when you have issues, you can go for a team building places to bring peace, unity among yourselves. So can also work.
So if it works for the corporate, it definitely can work for the refugee crisis. And Hilda, maybe to end on the role of women, what can we do differently going forward as we try to wind down this conversation? What can we do differently as women, but then also whose role is it to make sure that peace thrives? Do we leave it as a women's issue? Because we can't. So whose role is it? Who do we call to? When you look in that camera, tell those people.
As I'm actually concluding, I think that this issue shouldn't be left out only for women. It should be a concern to most countries, specifically the governments, because these women, once they suffer, they suffer in the hands of the government, not them individually. So the government should actually step out and do something, because these women are really suffering. They are being looked at as domestic workers. They know their role as just staying home to do domestic chores. They don't involve them in any developing matters. So the government as well should step out and do something for them.
Yes, on that matter, even the civil society organization, it's their role on advocacy, mass awareness, on on peace building movements. They should do mass awareness in the communities to improve their knowledge on peace and security.
Also, maybe what I would like to add in addition is, as a government or as a community, skilling refugees is important. In as much as they are temporary in our countries, we need to ensure that when they go back to their homes, they go back different, with different skills to rebuild them physically, emotionally, and psychologically. So skilling refugees is important. They had lives back then home. It is just important we add on to their lives and make sure they are
regardless
safe.
of whether they are still here or gone, they had a good time. They had a better life where they were situated in the moment.
And in the end, they'll remember. So Dan will say, when we were in Uganda, then we got this skill.
I was listening to some lady who studied in Uganda as a refugee for 13 years and went back and actually began an organization for women to be able to, create agency and voice in her community.
So that is what we need to do as CSOs, citizens of this country, and as a government in general. We just need to be there and support the women, because they're women. We're just divided by borders, but we're all Africans at the end of it all.
Going forward, I know this is a hard conversation to have, especially because war hasn't been something we've experienced as young women. Conflict has happened within our region, but it somehow we've been cushioned by where we are situated in this country. I wonder what this conversation would be like if we had maybe an intergenerational conversation with people that were here in the LRA time, but then also in the 86s when there was that transition of government, the Liberation War, and see the dynamic of the lens of privilege that we sit in compared to where they were. But I also don't want to be aloof to the fact that we've had these experiences. You shared earlier the experience that your mom shared with you. I know for a fact my aunties who are older would rather have Museveni because they do not want to imagine what a war will look like. So in talking about relief and recovery, how do we situate ourselves in the moment to think about, recovery, not just for women in these places, but then also for us as a community, in the things that we deal with on a daily basis as women, in the crisis that happens within our communities, because violence usually spreads from elsewhere and seeps through where we are. So in speaking to relief and recovery, how do we plan better for the future, but even for now as well?
Okay, so for now, I'm going to give reference to the women who survived the civil war in Golo. that is something we can closely relate to in relation to conflict. And what my organization has done, we've done a lot of, activities, for example, registering of these women. Most of them are taken as children, child brides.
Yes.
They had children with people they don't even remember. Gang rapes were common in their time. So they had children who were not fathered. And if you look at the northern part of Uganda, the community and the cultural aspects in it, a woman is then disrespected, disowned because you have a child who is not from a conjugal, like a married child born out of marriage. The child is fatherless. So that discrimination that comes with that is unimaginable. You cannot imagine how you're discriminated against for bearing a child
that you didn't even want. Yes.
Talk about it and the abortion rights that are going around right now. So imagine what they went through, and the fact that as community, instead of accepting and taking them in and integrating and helping in the process of healing, we are contributing to the discrimination, the trauma and all that. So what we need to do as a community is to welcome these people, help them settle in, give them the psychosocial support they need. As CSO still, we need to do a lot. A lot is being done about women and women's rights, and then we tend to forget the survivors of war and those who are being, resettled. So we need to be more intentional. We need to go back to the drawing table and draft our agendas to include all women without othering the women who are survivors of conflict, with no ifs and buts. Yes. So I think that is really, really key for us to do as as women. Individually and also collectively. That is very, very key.
And then I love that you speak about our role as women, but critical for us in this conversation is the role of government. And that's why I want to bring you in, because this is a power struggle that happens, that sips us into conflicts that perhaps would have been avoided if governments could plan better. To bring you in that conversation, what then can governments do for relief and recovery situations within our region? It could be on a Great Lakes region perspective, because we are no longer able to delve into these things alone as Uganda, but also it could be nationally. What are the commitments governments can put to plan better for relief and recovery?
Thank you so much, Gloria. On that, government should improve social services for those people. Women should access good education for their children, good health, good roads, good buildings, and there is this menstrual hygiene. The sanitation facilities should be good. Yes, then the communities should also accept the displaced people. Yes, to improve their health, to improve their mental health,
their well-being.
Because
communities are critical. Because a lot of times the argument I've had with people is, I actually feel sometimes there are refugees that are well situated than the locals in where they're, but it's questionable, because these are refugees. They've left their whole countries in survival. They'll never be part of this community. It's akin to saying they own the land, and yet they own nothing.
Then another thing, government should give trainings. I've seen this around for women and young girls. Even skilling. They are trained tailoring, knitting, baking, and other skills.
Something that will give them money. As they organize.
But actually, I think I would like to acknowledge our government. It has done a lot in relation to skilling refugees. Definitely in collaboration with civil societies. But the skilling helps a lot. I remember when I was at Chiriandongo refugee camp, trying to skill the girls there and teaching them their rights, and the women leaders. And I realized these skills give them a new sense of hope, since they cannot be formally employed. getting this skill and knowing I can start up an enterprise, I can be employed and earn an income where I can survive and, you know, my family survives. That is really key for them, because it's a skill that they'll take with even when they go back home.
And they'll make money.
They'll make money out of it and survive. So we'll not have beggars and casual laborers with unpaid work for women that we always call for.
Exactly.
We'll have women who have decent income and can enable their survival for them and their families.
True.
So yeah, bravo to the government for that. And I hope they keep doing that.
And civil society as well. I want to end this conversation, ladies, but especially because I have hope as well that if we continue to, you know, to dissect the issues around peace and security, we'll be able to find solutions to women issues, but also people issues, because women issues are people issues. So in continuing this conversation, I want us to dissect critical issues around unpaid care work, you know, sexual-based violence, and all these other atrocities that happen to women that cause violence against women. And so we need to continue these conversations wherever you are, but then also find solutions within your communities to help women thrive, to help women find agency, but then also to give women voice. I cannot thank you enough for joining us in this conversation. I've been your host, Tricia Gloria Nabaye. See you into the next episode. Bye.